I never expected a single night to alter my life completely. At 42, I had settled into a predictable routine, going to work, coming home, and repeating the same cycle day after day. I wasn't searching for change. I wasn't looking for love. But then, late one evening, my son's best friend, a young man I had only heard about in passing from my son's conversations, walked into the diner where I worked, and everything started shifting. I assumed he had just come to escort me home, but I was mistaken. What followed was something I never could have anticipated. My name is Eleanor Carter. I'm 42 years old and live in a modest apartment in Brooklyn, New York. If anyone asked me how I was doing, I would simply smile and say I was fine. But the truth was, I couldn't remember the last time I truly felt okay. 4 years ago, my husband, Daniel Carter, lost his life in a car accident on his way home from a late meeting. In one tragic night, my entire world was turned upside down. Daniel wasn't just my husband, he was my partner, my anchor, my everything. After that night, I no longer knew how to fully live. My son, Liam Carter, turned 23 this year. He was the only thing keeping me from falling apart. I had convinced myself that by focusing on him, on his life and well-being, I could keep myself from feeling the grief and emptiness. But I was wrong. Liam had been raised in a home filled with love, but after losing his father, I knew there was no way I could ever fill the void that remained in his heart. He put on a brave face, trying to appear happy, but I could see how much he missed his dad. As for me, I buried myself in work. I was the night manager at a small place called the Bluebell Diner, located on the corner of 5th Avenue and 9th Street in Brooklyn. Every evening at 5 p.m., I arrived, and at 11 p.m., after the last customers had left, the chairs had been stacked and the floors had been cleaned. I finally headed home. I exhausted myself intentionally to avoid thinking about the emptiness in my life. My co-workers at the diner were good people. Maria, a 28-year-old waitress with a head full of unruly curls, loved to share stories about her awkward dating experiences. John, the head chef, was a gruff man in his 50s with a gray beard, but despite his grumpy exterior, he genuinely cared. Still, no matter who was around me, I felt like an outsider. Coming home to my small apartment in Park Slope, once filled with the warmth of my family's laughter, now only greeted me with silence. I would set my bag on the kitchen counter, pour a glass of wine, and stand by the window, gazing out at the quiet Brooklyn streets. That moment was the hardest, when work no longer distracted me and the loneliness set in, pressing down on me. I couldn't recall the last time I had truly felt loved. The days dragged on endlessly, like a film without a climax or conclusion. I had convinced myself I had adjusted, or perhaps I had simply been pretending. That is, until one night, a night that seemed no different from the rest, when everything shifted, and I had no idea that my life was about to take an entirely new direction. It was a chilly October night, and Brooklyn's air had turned crisp. As I stepped out of the diner at 11 p.m., I pulled my thin coat closer to my body, shielding myself from the cool breeze. I had no idea that someone was waiting for me. A black car sat parked directly in front of the diner. At first, I assumed it belonged to a lingering customer or someone waiting for a friend. But when the window rolled down, I saw a face, one that was unfamiliar yet strangely recognizable. A young man, his expression a mix of uncertainty and sincerity, looked at me. "Miss Eleanor," he said in a low, gentle tone. I narrowed my eyes slightly, suspicious. "Yes? You're Noah Evans, Liam's friend," I said, blinking as I tried to recall where I had heard his name. Liam had mentioned Noah before, a guy he often worked out with at the gym near our home. But I never imagined I would meet him like this. "Liam asked me to come get you," he explained. "Where is he?" I asked, a flicker of concern rising in me. Noah chuckled, looking somewhat sheepish. "Something came up unexpectedly, and he didn't want you walking home this late." I studied him for a long moment, assessing whether I should trust him. He looked younger than me, maybe 26 or 27, tall and solidly built, yet there was a quiet steadiness about him that made him seem older than his years. Even so, I hesitated. I had grown used to doing things on my own, reluctant to rely on anyone, especially someone I had never met in person. But as I glanced down the long, empty road ahead, dreading the 15-minute walk alone, I exhaled sharply. "All right. Thanks, Noah." I pulled open the car door, slid into the seat, and buckled my seatbelt. Noah drove cautiously, not reckless or impatient like many young men I had seen behind the wheel. He didn't speak much, but his silence had a kind of ease to it, one that didn't make me feel uncomfortable. Breaking the quiet, he finally asked, "How long have you worked at the Bluebell Diner?" I glanced at him. 6 years. After my husband passed, I needed a stable job to support Liam. Noah nodded, his face unreadable, though I caught a flicker of thoughtfulness in his eyes. "I'm sorry." "It's all right. It's been some time," I answered, doing my best to sound composed. A brief silence followed before Noah spoke again. "Liam really admires you. He always says you're the strongest person he knows." I couldn't help but smile, though there was a hint of sadness behind it. "I don't think so. But when you lose someone, you don't really have a choice. You just have to keep going." Noah didn't respond right away. Instead, he nodded, as if he understood exactly what I meant. For a long while, neither of us spoke. The silence between us wasn't awkward. It was simply there. It felt different to me. I was used to talking to women my age, people with families, those who constantly shared their struggles in their marriages. But Noah, he wasn't like anyone I had known before. He was nearly 16 years younger than me, yet there was a quiet steadiness about him that I couldn't ignore. What was even more surprising was that sitting beside him didn't make me uneasy. When the car pulled up in front of my apartment in Park Slope, I unfastened my seatbelt and turned to look at Noah. "Thanks, Noah. You really don't have to do this. I can walk home on my own." A faint smile crossed his face, his eyes softer than before. "I know, but sometimes someone should look out for you. For a moment, I was caught off guard. It had been so long since anyone had said something like that to me. I didn't know how to respond, so I simply nodded, pushed the door open, and stepped out. But as I shut the car door and made my way toward the building, I realized my heart was beating faster than usual. When I turned back and saw Noah still sitting there, his gaze following me as though making sure I got inside safely, I understood that something had shifted. I wasn't sure what it was, but I knew this night wasn't like all the others. I had assumed my life would always consist of the monotonous days at the Bluebell Diner and the lonely nights in my small apartment. But for the first time in 4 years, I felt something unusual, like a door inside me had cracked open just a little, and I wasn't sure if I should let it. I tried not to dwell on my encounter with Noah that night, or at least I told myself not to. But no matter how much I tried, I kept picturing him, the way he silently navigated the empty streets, the calmness in his expression, and the words that wouldn't leave my mind. Sometimes someone should care about you. It had been such a simple statement, just a polite remark without any deeper meaning. Yet, for some reason, hearing it made my heart race. I wasn't used to feeling like this. For 4 years, I had become accustomed to solitude, never expecting anyone to worry about me. The men my age, if they weren't already married, were too busy chasing their own ambitions. I never thought anyone would genuinely care. But Noah was different, unlike anyone I had ever met, and I realized that even more the following night. That evening, after finishing my shift at the Bluebell Diner, I returned home as usual. I set my bag down on the table, poured myself a glass of wine, and immediately sensed that something was missing. Not that I was expecting anything. I just felt a deeper emptiness than before. Then my phone vibrated. Miss Eleanor, was the diner busy tonight? I stared at the screen for a few seconds, already knowing who it was. Noah. I wasn't sure why he was texting me, but strangely, I didn't mind. In fact, I was a little surprised. I put my glass down, hesitated for a moment, then replied, Same as always, tiring but not too bad. What about you?" Less than a minute later, he responded, "Same as usual, but I was thinking about yesterday. I hope you didn't mind me giving you a ride." I frowned slightly. He had been thinking about last night. I swiped my fingers across the screen and typed, "It's no problem, Noah. Just unexpected. Not many people do that for me." His reply came almost instantly. "A lot of people should." I paused, unsure of how to respond. That statement, I wasn't used to hearing things like that. But Noah, after just one encounter, could say something so simple and yet make it feel so certain. Maybe he was just a kind person. Maybe he was just being polite. But deep down, I knew there was more to it. From that day on, our messages became more frequent. At first, it was just casual conversation. How was work today? Did it rain in Brooklyn? Has Liam mentioned me? But soon, the conversations grew deeper. One night, as I sat on my couch with my phone in hand, Noah sent a message that made me pause. "Have you ever thought about starting over?" I frowned and typed back, What do you mean? I mean your life. Have you ever considered doing something different? Trying something new? I hesitated, my fingers hovering over the screen. I had never thought about it that way. My life had always felt like a single, endless cycle. Wake up, go to work, come home, sleep. The idea of change had never even crossed my mind. I finally typed, "Honestly, I don't think I can, Noah." After a brief pause, he replied, "Why not?" I stared at his message, unsure of how to explain the exhaustion I carried, the invisible scars I had hidden for years. But something about the way Noah asked, his patience, his quiet understanding, made me want to open up. And that night, I did. I told him about Daniel, about how he had died so suddenly, about the years I spent holding myself together for Liam. And Noah listened, not just out of politeness, but truly listened. I could feel it in his responses, in the small, thoughtful questions he asked. It had been a long time since I had a conversation like that. And as time went on, I found myself looking forward to his messages every single day. Little by little, I noticed changes in myself. I no longer felt drained when I left work. I no longer felt the weight of loneliness pressing down on me the moment I walked into my apartment. Because I knew, no matter what, there would be a message waiting for me. I didn't want to admit it, but I was beginning to enjoy Noah's presence in my life, not in the way a woman my age was supposed to feel about a man so much younger than her, but in a way that made me feel safe. It was that feeling of security that scared me the most, because I knew that if I let myself fall too far, I might never be able to pull back. And I wasn't sure if I was ready for that. I couldn't say when it happened, but at some point, I started waiting for Noah's messages every night. At first, it was just casual stories, work, life, little things. But somewhere along the way, those conversations became something I couldn't go without. Over time, our conversations gradually became part of my daily life. Then, late one evening after finishing my shift at the Bluebell Diner, my phone buzzed again. "Eleanor, are you free tomorrow?" I stared at the screen, puzzled. It was the first time he had asked something like that. "Me? What do you need me to do?" "Nothing really," Noah replied. "I just thought maybe instead of heading straight home after work, you'd like to go out for a bit." I hesitated. It was such a simple offer. Just coffee, just two acquaintances sitting together and chatting. But something deep inside made me pause. How long had it been since I'd done something like this? 3 years? 4? I honestly couldn't even recall the last time I had gone out for coffee with someone for any reason other than work. A part of me wanted to decline immediately, but another part, the one I had been trying to ignore for weeks, felt curious. Finally, I typed back slowly, "All right, tomorrow morning at 10. I know a nice little cafe nearby." "Great, looking forward to it." I set my phone down and exhaled deeply. I wasn't sure why I had agreed, but once the message was sent, there was no taking it back. And that realization made my heart race a little. The next morning, I stood in front of my mirror longer than usual, just staring at my reflection. I was so accustomed to seeing myself in my waitress uniform, hair pulled back, minimal makeup just enough to hide the exhaustion from long, sleepless nights. But today, I wanted to look a little different. Not for Noah, not for anyone else, just for me. I wanted to feel like more than a 42-year-old woman working the night shift at a small diner. I chose a light blue sweater, dark jeans, and a pair of simple leather boots. Nothing flashy, just enough to make me feel a little more like myself. When I stepped inside the small coffee shop on 7th Avenue, a place I had been to a few times before, I spotted Noah already there, waiting. As soon as he saw me, he stood up, his expression brightening slightly. "You look beautiful today." The words caught me off guard, not because they were unexpected, but because it had been so long since anyone had said that to me. "Thank you," I responded, trying to keep my voice steady. We placed our orders: black coffee for Noah, a latte for me, and started talking. At first, it felt just like our text conversations, light, casual, effortless. But then something shifted. "Have you ever thought about leaving Brooklyn?" Noah asked, stirring his coffee. I gave a small smile. "You've lived here your whole life. Brooklyn is home, but home isn't always the best place to stay, is it?" I hesitated, my eyes studying Noah's face. He wasn't asking out of idle curiosity. He genuinely wanted to know. The truth was, I had never seriously considered it. Partly because of Liam, partly because of work, and partly because I wouldn't even know where to begin. Noah nodded, as if he understood. "I think everyone feels like that at some point. But sometimes a change is exactly what we need." I let out a quiet laugh. "You talk like someone who's been through a lot." Noah chuckled too, but something in his eyes told me there was more beneath the surface. Something complicated, something unspoken. For a moment, I wanted to ask, but I stopped myself. This wasn't a date. It was just two people talking. There was no need to dig deeper. And yet, no matter how many times I reminded myself of that, I couldn't ignore the way Noah made me feel. He looked at me, not as a mother, not as a widow, but as a person. And that, more than anything, unsettled me. Time slipped away faster than I expected. When I finally glanced at my watch, I realized it was already past noon. I stood, ready to end the meeting, but as I reached for my coat, Noah spoke again. "Do you want to take a walk?" I hesitated, caught off guard. A walk? I had assumed this would be the end, that we'd have coffee, exchange a few words, and then return to our separate lives. But now I was faced with a choice. I could say no, go home, and continue my life as it had always been. Or I could say yes, just this once, to see what might come next. I let out a soft breath and nodded. "All right, Noah, but just for a little while." He smiled. "You won't regret it. I wasn't sure if that was true, but as I walked out of the cafe beside him, one thing was certain. I had just broken my own rule, and I wasn't sure if I could ever go back. That walk was supposed to be a brief detour, a little extra time before we returned to our routines. I didn't expect it to be the moment that would change everything between us. We strolled through Prospect Park, where the trees had started turning into the golden hues of a New York autumn. The crisp air wrapped around us, and the dry leaves crunched beneath our steps. I pulled my coat tighter around me, feeling the chill seep into my skin. Noah walked beside me, his pace unhurried, as if he had nowhere else to be. He didn't say much, but the quiet between us wasn't uncomfortable. In fact, it was oddly soothing, a kind of peace I hadn't felt in a long time. Then, out of nowhere, he asked, "Have you ever thought about falling in love again?" I stopped walking, turning to him with wide eyes. "What do you mean?" Noah gave a small shrug, his expression open. "I'm just curious. You're an incredible, strong person with so much to give, but you keep yourself so distant from everything." A lump formed in my throat. "You don't distance yourself," he continued. "You just believe you don't need anyone. Or are you afraid?" His words made me freeze. I kept my gaze on Noah for a long time. He wasn't being sarcastic or mocking. His expression held nothing but genuine concern. But it was that concern that unsettled me. "I'm not afraid of anything," I replied, though even to myself, my words sounded unconvincing. Noah gave a small, knowing smile. "You know, Eleanor, sometimes the people who seem the strongest are the ones most afraid of getting hurt." I didn't know how to respond. I just stood there, motionless on the quiet park path, feeling the cool wind brush against my skin. And maybe, just maybe, he was right. Perhaps I was terrified. Terrified of opening up again, of allowing someone in only to lose them. But why did it have to be Noah who saw that? After that walk, I assumed everything would return to normal. I would continue my life as before, and Noah would return to his own world. I thought it had just been a passing moment. I was wrong. Noah didn't disappear. He still messaged me every day, still checked in after my late night shifts. And the worst part, or maybe the best part, was that I got used to it. I found myself waiting for his texts, scanning my phone screen for his name every time I heard a notification. And I resented myself for it. I wasn't some inexperienced 20-year-old confused by her emotions. I was a grown woman, someone who had endured loss, who had learned to guard herself. So why was Noah managing to shake that resolve? One evening, as I stepped out of the Bluebell Diner, I saw him leaning against his car. I stopped in my tracks, my heartbeat quickening. "Noah, why are you here?" He shrugged, offering a gentle smile. "I thought you might want a ride home." "I don't need one." "You don't have to, but that doesn't mean you should walk alone." I studied him, trying to come up with a reason to decline. But after a moment, I exhaled and climbed into the car. We barely spoke on the drive home, yet the silence between us wasn't uncomfortable. When we reached my apartment, I didn't immediately get out. Instead, I turned toward him, studying his face. "Why are you doing this, Noah?" He looked at me, his expression steady. "What do you mean? Caring about me like this? You don't have to." He fell silent for a moment before answering, his voice slow but sure. "Because I like you, Eleanor." It felt as though all the air had been sucked from my lungs. I stared at him, uncertain if I had heard correctly. Noah held my gaze, his voice unwavering. "I don't care about the age difference. I don't care what anyone else thinks. All I know is that when I'm with you, I feel at ease, like I can be myself, and I think you feel the same way." I struggled to find the right words. I couldn't dispute what he had said, but I also couldn't accept it. Clenching my hands in my lap, I took a deep breath. "Noah, I don't know if I can do this." He nodded, as if he had expected that answer, yet his gaze never wavered. "You don't have to decide right now. I just wanted you to know." I let out another sigh, then gently pushed open the car door and stepped out. But just as I was about to close it, I heard his voice one last time. "You can pretend this means nothing, Eleanor, but you can't lie to yourself forever." I stood there for a long while, watching his car disappear into the night. My heart pounded erratically in my chest. I had no idea what to do with this feeling, but one thing was certain. I couldn't keep running from it. I tried to push his words from my mind. I told myself that he was just a young man being kind, that he would move on quickly, that I could go back to my life as it was before. But I had been wrong, because after that night, everything felt different. I started paying more attention to him. When he texted, I would read his message over and over before responding. When I saw him waiting outside the diner, my pulse would quicken, and when I returned to my empty apartment at night, I realized just how much I had grown used to having him in my life. That scared me, but Noah didn't back away. He didn't disappear or retreat. He remained steady, his patience unwavering, his feelings clear. Then, one Saturday night, my phone lit up with a message from him. "Eleanor, would you like to have dinner with me?" I stared at the screen for a long time, knowing that if I said yes, things would never go back to the way they had been. But before I could overthink it, my fingers were already typing. "Okay, but nothing fancy." His response came almost instantly. "Nothing fancy, just two people having dinner together." But we both knew this wasn't just another meal. When I arrived at the restaurant, a small, cozy diner in Williamsburg, soft jazz played in the background, while dim yellow lighting gave the space a warm glow. Noah was already there, waiting. As I approached, he stood, his eyes lighting up with genuine happiness. "You look beautiful." I wasn't sure if he really meant it, but the compliment still made something warm bloom in my chest. "You don't look too bad yourself," I teased, trying to keep my tone playful. We ordered, and the conversation flowed as it always did. Casual talk about work, about our day-to-day lives. But beneath the surface, there was something else, something neither of us dared to acknowledge. Then, midway through dinner, Noah set his utensils down and fixed his eyes on me. "Eleanor, you're avoiding me." I froze, my fingers tightening around my glass. "I'm not," I said, though even I didn't believe it. Noah didn't argue. His voice remained calm, unwavering. "You are. You know there's something between us, but you're pretending it's not there." My pulse quickened. He wasn't wrong, but I didn't want to admit it. Placing my glass back on the table, I inhaled deeply. "Noah, you're 16 years younger than me. I'm Liam's mother. This can't happen." "Why not?" he asked without hesitation. I stared at him, struggling to find the right answer. Because it's not right. Because you shouldn't feel this way. Because I don't want to hurt you." Noah was quiet for a long moment. Then he leaned forward, his voice gentle but resolute. "You can say all of that, Eleanor, but there's one thing you can't say." I looked at him, my lips parting slightly, but no words came out. Noah's gaze didn't waver. "You can't say you don't feel anything." I wanted to argue. I wanted to insist that this was all a mistake, but I couldn't. I stared at Noah for a moment, knowing I couldn't deny it. Lying would be pointless, and we both knew the truth. The space between us felt dense, like I was teetering on the edge of something irreversible. Then, unexpectedly, Noah chuckled. "You don't have to make a decision right now," he assured me. "I just want you to know that I'm not going anywhere." There was something both unsettling and comforting about his certainty. He wasn't pushing me for an answer, just making it clear he wouldn't walk away. That was more terrifying than anything else, because for the first time in years, someone was willing to wait for me, and I wasn't sure how much longer I could keep my defenses up. That night, when Noah drove me home, I didn't resist. I didn't insist that he didn't need to. As I stepped out of the car, I hesitated before shutting the door. Then, to my own surprise, I said, "Thank you, Noah, for not giving up." His gaze softened, filled with quiet hope. "You won't give up either, Eleanor." I wasn't sure what lay ahead, but I could feel myself losing control. The walls I had carefully built to keep myself safe were starting to crumble. I didn't realize how much that night had changed me, only that when I returned to my small apartment, sleep wouldn't come. I sat by the window, watching the golden streetlights stretch across the silent Brooklyn roads, replaying Noah's words in my mind. "You can't say you don't feel anything." I hated that he was right. I felt something, more than I wanted to. For so long, I had convinced myself I was fine on my own, that I didn't need anyone. But then Noah appeared and shattered that illusion. He never rushed me, never demanded an answer, but he did something even more terrifying. He made me realize that I couldn't keep running forever, and I wasn't sure how much longer I could try. After that night, I acted as if nothing had changed. I still worked at the Bluebell Diner. I still replied to Noah's messages. I still pretended everything was the same. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. I responded to his texts more quickly. My pulse quickened whenever his name appeared on my phone. When he showed up outside the diner late at night, I no longer told him he didn't have to walk me home. Instead, I just smiled and got in the car. And Noah didn't call attention to it. He simply watched me with quiet understanding, as if he knew I was changing but wasn't ready to say it aloud. One evening, as I stepped out of the diner at the end of my shift, I spotted a figure standing across the street. It wasn't Noah. It was Liam. I stopped. Liam never came to the diner this late. He had his own life, his own obligations. Yet there he was, hands tucked into his coat pockets, studying me with an expression I couldn't quite read. I crossed the street, forcing my voice to stay steady. "Liam, what are you doing here?" He regarded me for a moment before offering a small smile. "You should be asking yourself that." I understood what he meant. He had put the pieces together. Then, glancing toward the curb, Liam's eyes landed on Noah's car. "How often has Noah driven you home?" I clutched my purse a little tighter, my heart thudding. "Just a few times." Liam arched an eyebrow. "A few times? Are you sure?" I hesitated. Lying had never been my strength, especially not with my own son. With a quiet sigh, Liam shrugged. "I figured this out a long time ago." I blinked. "What?" His gaze held mine. "You and Noah." For a moment, my heart seemed to stop. My lips parted, but before I could speak, Liam lifted a hand. "You don't have to deny it. I'm not blind. I've seen the way Noah looks at you. I've seen the way you react when his name comes up. You've changed, Mom." I swallowed hard. "What do you think about all this?" Liam studied me for a long moment. Then, to my shock, he chuckled. "I think you've been alone long enough." I froze. I had braced myself for anger, for judgment. I had expected resistance. But instead, my son stood there, looking at me with an understanding I hadn't anticipated. "I don't know where this will lead," Liam admitted, "but I do know one thing. Noah cares about you. And if you feel the same, why keep hiding?" I didn't know what to say. I could only stand there, feeling the ice inside me begin to thaw. That night, when I slid into Noah's car, I no longer hesitated. I no longer felt guilty. For the first time, I no longer felt like I was doing something wrong. I turned to him with a small smile. "Do you want to grab some coffee?" Noah blinked, caught off guard. "Right now," I nodded. "Right now." He studied me for a long moment, then smiled, genuine, bright. "Of course." And so, on a quiet Brooklyn night, we ended up in a 24-hour coffee shop, stepping into something new. I didn't know where this road would lead, but for the first time in years, I was ready to find out. I never imagined I'd be in a relationship like this. Me, a 42-year-old woman, who believed my heart was closed after years of loss. And Noah, a 26-year-old man, steady, patient, and determined. He saw me in a way no one else ever had. I fought it, made every excuse to keep my distance. But in the end, I realized something important. Love doesn't follow rules. We don't get to decide who we fall for. We can only choose whether to have the courage to accept it. And for the first time in years, I made the decision to stop running. It didn't take long for my relationship with Noah to become apparent. After that night, when I invited him out for coffee without a second thought, I knew I had fully embraced what we had. We started spending more time together. At first, it was simple, grabbing dinner after work, taking long walks through Brooklyn, talking late into the night. But eventually, the unavoidable happened. Liam figured it out before anyone else. One evening, while I was at home, Noah arrived to pick me up for dinner. As I opened the door, I saw Liam standing there, watching us both in silence. His expression wasn't one of anger or disapproval, just quiet understanding, with the hint of a smile. "So, you finally stopped running," he remarked, folding his arms. I exhaled, shaking my head. "You really don't find this strange?" Liam merely shrugged. "Not really. I just think you're happier, and that's enough for me." A surge of emotion swelled in my chest as I looked at my son. He had grown more than I realized. And maybe, just maybe, I was the one who still needed to grow up a little. Noah didn't say anything. He simply stood there, steady and patient, as always. In that moment, I was certain I had made the right choice. We never felt the need to justify our relationship to the world. Not everyone would understand. Not everyone would approve. But that didn't matter, because when I was with Noah, I felt like myself. Not just a widow, not just a single mother, not just someone bound by duty. I was Eleanor, a woman who could still love, a woman who was still worthy of love, and that was enough. One evening, as we sat on a bench in Prospect Park, Noah turned to me, his gaze as patient as ever. "Do you regret it?" he asked. I held his hand, feeling the crisp night breeze, the warmth of his fingers wrapped around mine. I already knew my answer. I shook my head gently, a smile forming on my lips. "Not at all." Noah smiled too. We sat there in the peaceful Brooklyn night, saying nothing more, because we both understood that this was only the beginning.